Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I cannot imagine that this is our 9th session of the fall season. It doesn't seem possible that the time could have gone that quickly, but it has. And I know I've come away with a much better, different understanding of the conflict, the war in Vietnam, and a lot more appreciation for what the individual branches of the services did. And I'm grateful to every one of our speakers for coming out this season and providing us those perspectives. And I'm looking forward to us going forward into 2022 when we, in the 3rd week of February, it is the 3rd Monday in February, we will start our next lecture series, which will be on World War II in the Pacific. And that'll go for 10 weeks all the way until just about May there. And so we're very excited to be having that. Now, as we begin all of our programs here at the Silversides, please stand while we say the Pledge of Allegiance if you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'm going to go grab the clicker over here. Now, Ron is great with the clicker. He has magical abilities to it. I don't know if I have those same magical abilities, but he certainly has those magical abilities. So, Ron, what do you do to beat this up to make it work so well?
I don't know.
Okay. Let's try turning it on and off again.
So it's not working for you?
Well, maybe I just need to get it up higher. Okay, Tom, I need your help. Ron is great. He just goes up and bashes the screen and it all happens. You know, I am not so lucky as they are. So, thank you. Yeah.
How old are the batteries?
2 weeks. So, don't know why, but it is. But I'll give it back to you because you're always so gucky with it.
Oh, there's something going on.
Yeah.
Here we go.
There you go. Thank you. As with all of our lectures this semester, or this fall season, they have been brought to us by a wonderful family and a wonderful foundation, the Birch Foundation. It is through them that we are able to serve our mission of educating people on past and present military conflicts. And through that, we bring a better understanding of what was involved. And through that, you really get to our bottom mission of honoring our veterans. Because without the knowledge, there is no honoring them, because it's just something completely foreign. No one has any idea. And those statements we say, thank you for your service, they're not as meaningful unless you understand what exactly it is that some of these people have done. And all have been done when they're in the military. And so serving a major portion of our mission is honoring the veterans. And through the Birch Foundation, we are capable of doing this. Our next slide is our media sponsor, Blue Lake Public Radio. They do an incredible job of supporting us and letting people know about what we are doing here at the museum, and we could not do it without them. Next slide, please. If you have not heard about this Thursday is Veterans Day. And the Tyler Sales Company was lucky enough to be able to bring the Budweiser Clydesdales here to Muskegon. There will be 2 parades, one on Wednesday in Fremont and one here on Thursday in Muskegon. Also, immediately following that, there will be a concert at the new convention center downtown. If any of you are interested in going, please stop by the gift store. I have free wristbands for anyone that wants to go. The red wristbands are if you're a veteran. The yellow wristbands are if you are not a veteran. And if anyone needs any of those, please stop on the way out. We will gladly give you any of those. If we do not have, I know I have plenty for veterans, but I have only about 15 left for non-veterans. So if anyone needs one that is a non-veteran, we will go pick up more and bring them back. And you can just pick them up here at the museum. But this is a wonderful event that happens here this one time only. It's been about 7 years since the Clydesdales have been here in Muskegon, and they will be parading downtown, and then they'll be available for people to see and to take pictures with, and then there'll be a wonderful concert immediately following that. Our fall lecture series, as I said, is coming too closely to a close. We are in the 9th of 10 sessions that we'll be having, and tonight's is particularly poignant, the home front, and how much the home front has influenced how we perceive the war, how it's perceived by those that are fighting the conflict, how it's perceived by those that are living at home, and how it's going to influence the way that the people choose to fight that conflict. And it's an incredibly interesting thing, and we could not have a more wonderful person than Ron to be able to give us that information. Next week, we'll be having our last one, and it will be Fred Johnson, and he will be wrapping up everything and how the Vietnam War has affected all future conflicts in the United States, and how Vietnam ended has had profound effects across the board into any type of political, military, civilian things, and what the lasting legacy of that is. You can go one more slide, please. And we have Ron here. Tonight's speaker is Ron. Now, Ron is just incredible, and we are so very lucky to have him here. His presentations are always enlightening. They are well thought out, clear, and we could not ask for a better speaker. So without further ado, I will turn the mic over to Ron.
You know, my wife cannot use electronics because she drains the battery. She literally does. It's part of her physical makeup. And Peggy, it might be with your electronics.
Maybe I am draining the battery. That's quite a possibility, you know. As all of you have seen, I've gotten a little bit more mobile lately. And there's a lot of electronics that goes on in my life. So maybe I'm draining the batteries or not. But let me go and switch slide presentations, and we will get Ron up and going here.
Thank you, Joanne. I hope this works out well. I didn't get to rehearse this one with you like I did that other one. That worked out really well.
That did, yeah.
Okay, that's it. All right, now let's see if this works for me.
Well, you know, it probably will. You know, it's just the way things go. I swear he's rigged it.
My work here is done. There is a fable, a parable from India about 6 blind men first coming in contact with an elephant. They'd been blind all their lives. They had never seen an elephant, but they had heard so much about it. They wanted to see what it was like. The 6 wise men, or the 6 men, then gathered around the beast, and each one felt with his hands to see what the beast was like. And the first one touched the tusks and said, "Ah, an elephant is like a sword." And the next one touched the trunk. "Ah, no, an elephant is like a snake." The next one touched the ears and said, "Oh, like the leaves of a palm tree." The next one, the side, said, "Oh, the elephant's like a wall." The next one touched the legs and said, "Oh, the elephant is like a tree trunk." And the last one touched the tail and said, "Ah, the elephant is like a rope." Whether it be an analogy or a metaphor, and I'm not sure which one it is, I'm going to use this fable, this parable, to refer to the United States as Vietnam affected it.
All's fair.
Come on. Okay, we may simply have to do this by
There you go.
nodding head or something.
You
Okay.
got it.
It affected it, and I'm going to discuss it in 6 categories. That being economic, political, military, social, pop culture, And finally, what I call the national psyche, which is kind of a wrap-up of how it affected the country at large. Tonight, we will revisit the United States of the 1960s, and in particular, the American home front during Vietnam. I might as well just put this aside, shouldn't I? Click, please. And I am Ron Janowski. I am a retired lieutenant colonel, and I did not go to Vietnam. I was graduated from West Point in 1976, a year after Vietnam and Saigon fell. So I wasn't actually there, but I served with many who did. And I certainly was in the United States during this period of time. So let's talk about what the United States was like at the beginning. Now, the United States had been in Vietnam since 1955. If you guys were here for my presentation on the Army, you know that in 1955, the United States, under Eisenhower, sent the Military Army Advisory Group to help pick up the pieces after the French had left. But we're going to talk about primarily the 1960s, because that's where the action really happened on the American home front. We had a new president, dynamic, energetic, Camelot. Officially, his administration was called the New Frontier, and it was expected that we would be branching out and doing great things. Now, Kennedy was many things, but in particular, his foreign policy rotated around the domino theory, which Eisenhower had actually given the nickname to. But it was the concept of whenever the Soviet Union or the Russians pushed, click, we would push back. Okay? The domino theory. And it was a fully accepted idea that if you gave the Russians or the communists a little bit of an inch anywhere in the world and did not push back, the other countries surrounding would fall like dominoes. Now, click please. Now, for most Americans, this was their window to the world, the television set. All the news came across here, all the pictures, all the news, unless you were focusing on your little plot of land, wherever it might be, Muskegon or elsewhere, your view of the world, particularly of places far-flung, came through the television. And in the early 60s, the name of Vietnam first started appearing. Okay. But not many people had heard of it in the early days. Now, my dad happened to be part of that military advisory group. So he was there from 60 to 61, and I was aware that he was away and he was at some place called Vietnam. But for most people, there were so many other things happening. There was, click. Boom, there was Sputnik, there was the space race. The Soviets had sent up a little Sputnik up there, and it was going around and beeping, and you could even see it at night. And we were terrified because, of course, there was this war going on of wills and nuclear power and everything else, and there's this thing flying right over it, just beeping away. Now, that's all it did, but it was certainly a harbinger of far worse things. So we had Sputnik, we had click. We had the Berlin Wall go up in 1961, August of 1961. We had click. We were all learning how to protect ourselves so we would survive the nuclear blast outside our school windows by getting under our desk and putting our hands down. And click, we had rock and roll, where most of our parents thought, forget the bomb, we've got Elvis is bringing us to our knees. Against all of that, click, Vietnam just kind of faded into the background. But that would change, particularly in click 1963. Because in November of 1963, in a heartbeat, click, the world changed. And Kennedy was dead. Click. Now, Kennedy had amassed a very potent force of brilliant men, chosen men, the best and the brightest of men. And with Kennedy's death, click, Lyndon Johnson, vice president, was elevated, click, to the presidency. Now, this was an incredibly important moment in the United States and Vietnam, because Johnson had an opportunity to set his own agenda on everything. And he looked and he saw things that he wanted to do. He was particularly interested in domestic policy. He was a domestic policy kind of guy, and he fully intended that his administration would be known for domestic policy. But he looked out there and he looked at, click, what was going on with the South Vietnamese and the click, the North Vietnamese facing him, and he took a deep breath and he said, click, we will stand firm in Vietnam. We believe in what we're doing. It's not going to be the main show. It'll be a side show. But nevertheless, we will stand firm and we will stop those commies in their tracks, wherever they may be. Only 10 years earlier, we had done something similar in Korea, hadn't we? They had stuck their heads up and like whack-a-mole, we hit them back. Well, of course, as we all know, Korea is still under armistice. But nevertheless, Johnson said, we did it in Korea, we can do it in Vietnam, we will stand firm, and we will stand firm using Kennedy's own plans for arming and bringing the South Vietnamese to defend themselves. We moved into 1964, and click. Johnson had moved ahead in activating forces, training South Vietnamese. But in August of 1964, almost a year after, well, a little less than a year after the death of Kennedy and the movement of LBJ up to the presidency, a U.S. Navy destroyer was attacked. And that might be too strong a word, it might not, but they were aggressed by 3 gunboats belonging to the North Vietnamese. And they fired on our ship, and we said, how dare you? And because it was in the Gulf of Tonkin, LBJ asked permission to have the power to respond without any restraints. And the Gulf of Tonkin Accords, or the Gulf of Tonkin Act, was approved by Congress, which essentially gave LBJ free hand to do whatever he needed to do to slap down these upstarts in their little boats. Now, 2 days after the first attack, there was yet another attack. It is still speculated as to whether or not it actually happened, or whether or not LBJ simply used another attack to further emphasize that he needed to have the authority. He was given the authority, and he moved ahead to strike back against the North Vietnamese. Click. We move into 1965, 1966. Click. Escalation. Click. This was the enemy. This is what pictures when we started getting word of Vietnamese and North Vietnamese and Viet Cong and communist. This is what came back as what we were facing. And the United States said, are you kidding? 20 years earlier, we brought Hitler to his knees. 20 years earlier, we decimated the Japanese fleet. Only 20 years, and this guy? Are you serious? He can possibly stand up against the might of the United States? And in February of 1965, we started bombing in North Vietnam. And of course, there was a land component as well. Click. And we started bringing in, click, we started expanding military presence on the land. By 1966, we were up to over 1/3 people on the ground. In fact, that was just this year. We still have these guys. So we're at about 500,000 soldiers on the ground in Vietnam. Click. Now, up to this point, the United States public was generally in support of what the president was doing. We were the United States. We were defenders of democracy, and we're not going to let some little country try to push themselves into, well, a position they shouldn't be in. But, predictably, with the expansion of our forces, there were also casualties, click, and they grew. By 1966, we're numbering somewhere around 10,000 American lives killed. These are KIAs, killed in action. They aren't just wounded. We've actually had Americans killed, up to about 10,000 by 1966, if you add up those numbers. And there is concern. Now there is pushback. Now the American public is saying, oh, wait, click. Now, General Westmoreland, the commanding officer, the commanding general of all American forces, and South Vietnamese forces for that matter, in the South, didn't really help the situation. Because, frankly, he was facing a situation he hadn't run into before either. Westmoreland was a West Point graduate of 1936. He had come to his he had gone through his master's and doctorate program in military, if you will, in World War II, where you had big forces, you hit them, you went around them, you knew where they were, you destroyed the forces, you beat up the generals, you capture the king, and checkmate. Well, that wasn't happening in Vietnam, was it? Because the forces in Vietnam were like, I don't know, like mist. As soon as they hit, they disappeared. And they might disappear right in front of you. Like Mao Zedong would say, guerrillas hide in the villages and the people like fish in the sea. And so Westmoreland had quite the challenge. He couldn't set up, we will capture this town, we will capture this high ground, we will capture this army. So what he settled on were two rather expeditious ideas of how to conduct war in this new environment, click. And they were body counts and free fire zones. Now, body counts is simply, he used numbers of estimated dead to measure the military's progress towards the enemy, against the enemy. Extremely misty, because you can't confirm a lot of this stuff. And the numbers were almost invariably inflated. So we had body counts coming back saying, well, yes, we've lost 10,000 Americans, but we killed, 500,000 bad guys. And in order to expedite the mission of killing more bad guys, he instituted free fire zones where he'd wrap up entire circles of land and he'd say, anything goes. Bombing, shooting, anything. It's a free fire zone. It made for a very disillusioned response by the American public, who often have a scant view of how the military operates anyway, but it was even more so under these conditions. Now, Westmoreland was tied. I mean, he didn't know any other way to do it, but it didn't sit well with the people back home when you said, well, your son, your boyfriend, your brother is dead, and it's because, well, we killed 1,000 of the bad guys. And we've got these free fire zones. That's what generated the discontent at home, click. What really brought it home for the Americans at home was the fact that we needed bodies to go out and fill those numbers. And so the government initiated the selective service, the draft. Over the period of 64 to 75, some 2.2 million young men were contacted. I was contacted, as a matter of fact. I was at West Point at the time. My mother answered the door. The guy said, we're the selective service. Is Ronald here? Well, no, he's at West Point. Oh, well, I guess we'll see him later. But 2.2 million were invited to come to Vietnam. Well, there was a growing disillusionment, and the response was not 100% in support of, click. Dodging, deserting, and resistance, click. It's estimated that some 40,000 young men chose to visit Canada during the time of 1965, 1975. Many of them settled there permanently. Went up to Canada. Canada did not send them back, and many of them are still up there. Click. Of greater concern was the 500,000 that actually went into service and then said, I don't think so. And they left. And they left not just in the United States. Some of them were in the Far East, in Vietnam. And they took off for Japan. They took off for Australia. Took off for the Philippines, I suppose. And some of them actually took off in Vietnam. Now, if they were recaptured, if they turned themselves in, what they faced was jail time and a dishonorable discharge. So there was little to encourage them to come back unless they really missed McDonald's and come back to the United States. I don't have a good number for how many actually came back. I'm not sure anybody does. But between these two numbers, we had quite a few people that were not interested in going. And if they did come back, they did have a ready enlistment in a new army that was growing, click, and that was the Students for Democratic Society and other organizations of young people protesting the war. And this was growing starting in 1964 and moving all the way through about 1975 and beyond. As you'll see, the protesting became a part of American college life and young people everywhere. Click. 1967. Click. Some high-profile people started getting into the protesting business. Martin Luther King. In March, click, of 1967, he held a protest in Chicago for about 5,000 people. Click. Click again. His words on Vietnam were not highly supportive of the government. Click. He said, all war is immoral. Click. And this war, in fact, is taking away from money that we should be using for, Mr. President Johnson, your domestic program that you've been talking about. You've been promising us, and this is costing money. We're going to see in a couple of minutes that Johnson was trying to hide the fact of how expensive it was. But nevertheless, it was obvious. You send people to a war zone, you send a lot of stuff over there, you're spending money, and Martin Luther King said, you're diverting money from where it should be going. Here in our country. Click. And it's striking black men worse than white men. Well, now, I was curious about that, and I actually researched this afternoon. And it may show up off the bottom here. Click. Yeah. About 11% of the soldiers in Vietnam were black, and about 12% of the casualties were black. So, at least in the end, and I don't know exactly how these numbers match up with 1967, but ultimately, the black soldier did not bear a disproportionate burden. Yeah.
In the front lines up there, where they're out there taking fire, were their numbers higher than the whites, the guys?
I don't know.
Rather than in the rear?
I don't know. That would be a good question and something for me to check on, but I don't know right off the bat. Now, I will say, you guys are all familiar with the ASVAB?
Yeah.
It's the aptitude test that recruits take in order to place them within the military. It may well be that, well, it's a fact that a lower ASVAB would put you in a combat position. And if a young black man took the test coming from, say, an inner city, he might well have a lower aptitude test just because of his schooling. I'm making this up as I go along, but that would make sense to me.
What's going through my head here is because if they were proportionally, if their numbers were greater in the combat zone, then actually they might have taken less casualties, it would seem, because the total numbers of blacks and versus whites there came out to, you said 11% for population, 12% over there,
Yeah,
or vice versa, whatever you said there.
yeah.
This is curious. We'll look that up.
It is curious, but I don't know. I'll check that out. I'll see if I can come up with an answer on that. Yeah.
At the time too, if I remember right, if you got in trouble, the judge says you can go to Vietnam or you can go to jail.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what that had to do with those numbers, but
Yeah,
the judge told them, a lot of them, that's the choice he had.
yeah. Well, once again, 12% of the soldier population in Vietnam were blacks. And 11% and 12% of the killed in actions were blacks. So I'm not sure where we can go with this from here, but let's, for a country that prided itself on life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Heck, Superman even said, what did he say, life in the American way? Well, Martin Luther King said, it stands against everything we stand for. Everything. A little over 6 months later, click, a little less, October, there was another rally. Click. 100,000 showed up at the reflecting pool and the Lincoln Memorial. You all have probably seen this, whether you remember it or not. Click, because Forrest Gump was there. That was the same rally that Forrest Gump was at, where he sees his girlfriend and runs through the water. That was the rally in October of 1967. Click, make Forrest Gump go away. Click again. After they had made themselves known at the Lincoln Memorial, about a third of them marched across the river and went to the Pentagon to make sure that the Pentagon knew that they were concerned. This created one of the most iconic and contrasting views of American society in 1967. And this would follow us to today. Click. The sheer size of this rally, the 100,000 and the 30,000 went to the Pentagon, created this, I'd have to call it a permanent schism. And for the first time, the left and the right started calling each other names. You're a traitor. You're a fascist. And that could come out of today's headlines right now. But it started with this rally in October of 1967, where it actually crystallized. Click. What's shocking is this was only 20 years after Click, the United States, had joined together in joyous union to celebrate the end of World War II. And here we are at each other's throats. Click. Click. Now, General Westmoreland wanted to try to put the kibosh on the rising fever. And so in November, ironically enough, the anniversary of Kennedy's death some, 4 years earlier, he held a press conference. And he spoke of the Vietnamese, and he spoke of the North Vietnamese in particular, and how hopeless their situation was, and the light is on at the end of the tunnel, and I see you shaking your head. Everybody will be home by Christmas, and this is what he said. Click when he talked about the North Vietnamese. Click again. Yeah, they're on their heels. Those North Vietnamese. They should have known better than to mess with us. Click. About 2 months would pass before the North Vietnamese would respond. Click. On January 31st of 1968, click. South Vietnam was rocked by a coordinated attack of over 100 villages. Click. Some 700,000 North Vietnamese and communist forces struck at multiple sites. Click. Now, the North Vietnamese suffered some. They fought this for a full 9 months, the Tet Offensive. Click. And they lost some 40,000. Southern casualties were quite a bit less, about click 3,000. So you think, okay, well, good. We beat them bad. Tactical victory. Maybe tactical, not strategic. Click. Because the United States public, and of course, we have all sorts of photojournalists over there now that were covering the war day and night, sending pictures back and sending reports back, and this word got back, and the American people, click, were very concerned. Click. Hey, what happened with the, click? We got the American soldier keeping the dominoes up, and this guy should fold, right? Click. Maybe he's a whole lot bigger than we thought. And it was fodder for the protesters. They said, this is not over. This isn't in any way over. Yeah, they might have had their, keisters handed to them on a platter, but the very fact their keisters were there at all is disturbing. And they just keep coming. Click. And the war casualties kept coming. And click, the photojournalists would send back pictures, click, of just how brutal this was. Click. And the protests ramped up. This was gasoline being poured on the fire. Click. Public support is important. Duh. No less a personage than Benjamin Disraeli, Click, said that public support is what makes a country work, and without it, a administration and a country will decay. It cannot pursue its goals. He was Prime Minister under Queen Victoria. Now, we've seen it in our own country. Click. Abraham Lincoln needed it in order to continue the war after Gettysburg. Click. Franklin Roosevelt knew on the day after Pearl Harbor that he could go before Congress and get a near unanimous vote to declare war. It would have been unanimous, except the one person didn't want to have it go down in history as a unanimous decision to support the president. But everybody believed in it. Public support validates anything that a government does. Click. Now, Lyndon Johnson in 1968 was facing election. He had been elected in 1964. Now, because he finished Kennedy's term, that didn't count against him on the only two terms thing. So he ran in 1964 and got elected, and in 1968 he was the presumptive candidate for the Democrats to not only run, but win re-election as president. But Johnson was a shrewd politician. He had been in politics since 1930-something. So he'd been around a long time. He knew how to read the people. He knew how to read the tea leaves. And he was not happy himself. Click. Vietnam had completely scuttled his intended goals of his administration. He had been a domestic policy guy. He had thought that he would go down in history as a domestic policy president. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was under him. And he planned to do so much more, but this Vietnam, it just grew and enveloped him. And he himself said, it just ain't no fun no more. I doubt if he did double negatives. But he just said, it's not fun anymore. And in 1968, in March, he held a routine press conference on TV, Click. And at the end of it, he said, by the way, I'm not running. I will not accept the nomination of my party, and I will not run. The ultimate winner of this, stepping aside by Johnson, was Click, Richard Nixon. Nixon had, of course, run against Kennedy back in 1960, had declared that he would never run for anything again. And here he is in 1968, and he is elected. Now, one of the strong points that he ran on was something where he would withdraw from Vietnam. He had a policy called Vietnamization, click, in which the Vietnamese soldiers would steadily gain a higher proportion of combat, and the American soldiers would steadily reduce, ultimately leaving the scene altogether with the trained Vietnamese, South Vietnamese defending themselves. Click. From 1969 to 1973, click, we did exactly that. Here's Melvin Laird, the Secretary of Defense, describing how the numbers of American forces are going down, 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 and we are continuing to train the South Vietnamese to hold their own. Click. But the hits kept coming. In November of 1969, a news release announced that over a year earlier, American forces, strictly American forces, had committed one of the greatest atrocities of modern times, in which an American force went in and brutally wiped out 2 villages, My Lai and My Khe, joining villages. They don't even know exactly what the numbers were, but it was something between 347 and 507. Men, women, children, grandparents, just slaughtered. There were problems at home too. Click. In May of 1970, a protest at Kent State University resulted in National Guardsmen trying to slow down the progress of the protest. Shots were fired. 4 students were killed. 9 wounded. Click. Click. The Paris Peace Accords were signed by January of 1973, finally withdrawing combat forces of the United States from Vietnam, and click, 2 years later, in April of 75, click, we withdrew our presence altogether in this famous photo, which was actually kind of duplicated about 2 months ago in Afghanistan. Click. But the damage had already happened. The change. We move forward with change. This is like, the judge in a courtroom saying, the jury will disregard that testimony. You can't do that. The country had changed. And the young men who had gone off to war in 1965, click, came back to a very different America. Click. Click. Let's talk about the 6 areas I picked. Click. Click. The Vietnam conflict, it was never a fully actually declared war, but the conflict itself cost the United States government some $143.8 billion, which was 76% more than they would have spent under peacetime conditions. That's a lot of bread, a lot of money. And this is what Martin Luther King was talking about. All that money should have gone to domestic programs, but instead it got siphoned, sucked into Vietnam. Click. LBJ did not want to tell the American public just how much the government was spending. Normally, what you would do would be to raise taxes to try to pay for this, but he didn't want to do that and let the cat out of the bag just how much money was being spent. Click. So instead, click, it led to a cycle of inflation. The huge costs were borne by the government, printing money, and the inflation by 1965 to 68 was about 8.2%. Now, I looked this up this afternoon too. Just what is a crisis in inflation? 2% is okay. If it goes above 2, you're in trouble. And they were up to 8. By the way, today we're at 5.4 in the country. Pass that out. Click. What this led to in the 1970s was this. Click. Rising prices, rising wages, rising prices, rising prices, up, 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 and click, higher fuel costs. I think we're all old enough here to remember the long lines at the gas pumps. Energy prices went up, and embargo as a result of the economic policies of Vietnam. Click. Political. Click. Vietnam spelled the end to the Democrats in the White House, at least for the time being. It had, well, of course, Kennedy's assassination took him out, but it also ended Lyndon Johnson's and brought the Republicans in under Nixon. Click. Congress also moved to close that loophole which had started back in 1964, giving the president complete blank check of do what you need to do. And in 1973, they passed the War Powers Act, which seriously put restrictions on what the president could do, specifically in the amount of time he could do it. The president can act, but must report to Congress within 48 hours and must get a formal authorization within 60 days. So the president could still act. And I know Nixon, or not Nixon, but Reagan did it with Grenada and a number of other places. So the president could act, but now there was some restriction. Click. The greatest hit on the government, however, was the popularity, the trust. How much do you trust those guys up in Washington? And you can see across the years from 1964 till the withdrawal in 1975, it was a pretty steady decline. It continued down until actually Reagan's election, and it went back up again. But it took a serious hit, the government did, in the trust of the people, something that probably have never fully recovered from. Click. And certainly Nixon didn't help. With the Watergate scandal in 1974, 75, he continued down. Anyway, the US government has had a real lack of trust shown to it and has not demonstrated the trust that the people feel it should have. Probably still in effect, and it started here primarily. Vietnam was the first war that we had truly not won. I won't say lost, but we didn't win it. In Korea, at least we held them to an armistice. But Vietnam, kind of a mess. Click, particularly in the military. Now I told you, I graduated from West Point in 1976. I came in as a brand new lieutenant in 1976. So I saw many of the people who had served in Vietnam, and they were an unhappy bunch. The officers were shaking their heads, and the sergeants and privates were not happy either. Click. Click. The Tet Offensive had demonstrated the resiliency of the North Koreans. And in extension, it demonstrated the unpreparedness of a European war army against it. So the United States had to reevaluate where they were. Click, which gave rise to special forces, the Rangers, the Green Berets, the Air Force and Navy, I'm sure, had their particular adjustments as well. But this has continued to this day. Also, the draft, no longer considered very operative. So click, we instituted the Volunteer Army, which we are still under today from 1973 on, where all of our soldiers are ones who volunteered that I want to go be there. It has its pluses and minuses. Today, about 8% of the American public has served in uniform at any time. 8%. There are some who say, you know, maybe there should be more of a sharing there. And it's like I was telling someone earlier that I taught high school ROTC after my 22 years in service. And what I told the kids was, I don't care if you go into the military. What you need to do, however, is give back to the community, give back to the country. You can do it with your church, you can do it with your, some club, something. But give back. As long as we all give back a little, we'll be okay. So you don't have to be in the military, but volunteer army has been in effect since then. Click. Click one more time. The memories, however, of such atrocities as My Lai and the Kent State shootings left a lot of Americans very disillusioned about the military. The military really lost a lot of its mojo for many years because of those incidents. Click. And in 1971, an analyst in the Pentagon named Daniel Ellsworth released some papers which became popularly known as the Pentagon Papers, which outlined all of the classified, not to be released information of how the United States government pursued activities in Vietnam. It was not a pretty picture. Undercover stuff really never is. It's kind of like Jack Nicholson, you don't want to know what we do. But all of a sudden it got published in the New York Times, and it did no favors for the military. By the way, when I was that second lieutenant, one of the things I was told not to do, I was told that the soldiers were very upset and they didn't want to be messed with, especially not by some second lieutenant who knew nothing. And they said, when you're on staff duty, never go into that building at night. Because a month earlier, a second lieutenant had been put into a wall locker and pushed out the window. So don't go there. I never had that experience. But it was the kind of feeling that was pervading the military at that time. Everybody felt like it was just a bad thing to come out of. Click. Social. Click. The SDS, student protests in general, that were initiated during the Vietnam period of 1964 on, have today become almost a staple of college life. Protesting, making their voices heard. That was something that came about because of Vietnam. Click. We also had that sharp social schism, which, as I say, we know it still exists today. You listen to the news today, and there is a schism. Click. Now, thankfully, the assassinations of the 1960s have not continued on. Reagan, of course, was shot at. Ford was shot at. But still, the energy, the passion is still there to address inequities by the government, and people question. Click. Pop culture has always reflected our social being. Click. Many of us watched the news on TV, and we saw things coming to us from these photojournalists, and we saw things happening, terrible things. But they were also in print. Click. It used to be that soldiers were shown in the news or in print as gods, heroes to look up to. But now they were coming back, click, showing the horror of being a soldier in an unpopular war, in a war that we didn't know how to fight. Click. And music. Music will take you back to an earlier time, won't it? I mean, you hear a song on the radio and say, oh, I remember what I was doing when that came on. Well, look at some of these titles. Click. 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 And click. Any one of these as soon as you see the word, the name, it immediately starts playing in your head, doesn't it? And you immediately, I know where I was when I heard that. I put this one first because I was in 3rd grade. We sang this for an assembly. Click. But at a later time, I had my own personal moment. I didn't realize just how deep the division was until 1972. I was my first year at the academy, and we got word that Don McLean, American Pie, was coming to West Point. And I was excited. Well, he wasn't coming to be a cadet.
No.
No. But he was coming to give a concert at West Point. And it was really cool. He lived just down the river from West Point, so it wasn't that far a trip for him. And I, of course, had grown up in high school, playing the song. I knew all the words. And so I went to see Don McLean. And the night came, and I got in my seat, and I sat down, and I was ready, and I just, Don McLean's going to sing! And the stage opens up, and there's one chair out there with a guitar laying against it, and nothing else. Very nihilistic and a very simple kind of Globe Theater sort of thing. And out he comes, and it was him. It was Don McLean. Doggone it. He comes out, look just like that. And he comes out, and he walks to the microphone. And he looks out on us. And he says, I just want you to know, I am against everything you stand for. Man, that put a damper on things. He, of course, played the concert. Didn't get much applause. His songs were kind of flat. But it was then that I suddenly got the idea that there's something going on here. Another song. There's something happening here. Later that same year, I was in New York City dressed in my cadet outfit, and I got spit on. What the heck is that about? I'm 18 and 19 maybe. But I got spit on because of the uniform. Click. Even years later, the Vietnam Memorial brought out the schism. Click. Is it a healing wound? Click or click. A black gash of shame. Both of those showed up in newspapers describing the memorial. Click. Finally, national psyche. Click. We could write books on this, but I've boiled it down, simplified it, maybe oversimplified it, to 2 basic points. Click. One was our loss of credibility in the world. The United States could be defeated. Maybe the United States is losing its ability to do anything. This has followed us to this day in ways I don't need to go into tonight, but it started here with Vietnam, that maybe the United States had lost its way. Click. Now, this isn't a mistake. When I was teaching ROTC, I taught a portion on the Civil War. And in 1856, I told the students, there was an unbelievable thing that happened on the very floor of Congress. A Confederate, a Southern representative, came marching into the Senate, and his name was Preston Brooks. And he came up to the desk of Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. Sumner was a anti-slavery guy. Brooks was not. Now, a few days earlier, Sumner had given a speech in which he had referred to a fellow senator from South Carolina as taking on a whore for a consort. And that whore is slavery. Well, people took things a whole lot more seriously then, and it turned out that Preston Brooks was the cousin of the guy that Charles Sumner had badmouthed. And so he came marching up to Sumner and he said, "Sir, you have insulted my family. You have insulted my country, and you have insulted me. Now I would sooner beat you like a dog that you are than anything else. So he took his cane and started beating on Sumner right on the floor of Congress. Beat him senseless. Sumner was actually hospitalized for many months. And Brooks was pulled off. He was not imprisoned. He was not arrested. In fact, all the Southerners practically lifted him up on their shoulders and thanked him as a hero of the South. And because he had broken his walking stick, he was presented a brand new walking stick as a memorial to standing up for the honor of the South. I tried to tell that to kids saying, can you imagine that? Well, back when I taught, it was unimaginable. It's not unimaginable anymore. Some of the things we say and we hear are unbelievable. And click, it has led us to this terribly fractured country. And frankly, I don't know where we go from here. I don't know how we recover from here. But Vietnam did both of these things. Things that still haunt us today. Click. Because after all, history is a river. It is a flowing stream of consciousness, of civilization, of ourselves, moving through time. What has happened to us today is because of what has happened in the past. And what we do today will affect those that follow us. There are eddies, there are whirlpools, there are still waters, there are rapids. All of it is real and not to be, spurned or put aside. It's all part of who we are and we continue to be. And Vietnam was a horrendous shock to the system that still affects us today. Click. Questions?
Let me give you the microphone if you have a question so that our people at home can hear. Do we have a question, anyone?
Thank you.
Was the draft during that time run on some kind of a lottery?
It was. You saw
Can
that,
you
well, you saw that big barrel.
do that?
They had 366 little containers in there, each with a different date. Now, the draft for a given year was based on the birth year of those that were just turning 18. And so a number would come up and it was for April 12th. And if you were 18 and your birthday was April 12th, they write you down. You're the first ones in. They keep drawing until they get the number of names that they need. In fact, they probably went through the whole list, the whole 366, and then they just started down and made sure that they had the numbers they needed before they put the list aside.
Did everybody feel it was fair, or did they seem that? Did everybody feel that was fair, or did some people feel that dates later in the year were held back or something? Is there something, some kind of a?
Well, I can't imagine anything more fair if you're selecting across a population. I've never heard of anybody saying that it was an unfair system.
Okay.
What they didn't like was going at all, being coerced. And so that's why we went to the volunteer army in 1973. Yeah.
The drawings were probably fair, but the deferments, that was another question.
Well, now that's true. There were deferments. If you were in medical training, you were deferred. And there were other deferments as well that I don't know right offhand. I had personal experience, not me, but personal experience with my family having deferments because they were medical school people. Maybe anybody out here knows what some of the other deferments were?
I had a deferment because I was supporting my family at home.
Good one. We know
And
from World
also-
War II
Married people.
that family where they had 5 sons all die. And Saving Private Ryan, the movie, ultimately made it so that you could not be the last of your family. You would be deferred for that. Good, yeah. Ken, you had something.
Yeah, I had Yeah, in February of 64, I was called up to appear for my draft physical. Okay, and as we gathered at the bus station, this was in Wausau, there were 20, 30 guys there probably. The draft board secretary asked us before we boarded the bus if anyone had been married since they had received their notice to report for the physical. And a few guys put their hands up, and she said, I think it's a crock, but you guys can go home. You do not have to go if you're married at this time.
That is a crock. Doesn't sound like that came out of a regulation.
That's probably not quite the words that she used.
Yeah, but
Marianne she was,
it sounded like
Pretty
she made a decision on the spot.
no, that was, I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
But there was a deferment if you were married for a period of time back at that time.
Mhm.
And then there were other times, like you mentioned, the medical studies,
Yeah.
and some people who I went to college with, and earlier on, I was part of it, were deferred just because they were still students.
Yeah.
And then once they got out, they were not deferred any longer. But,
In 1965, if you were married and had 3 children, you were deferred. A year later, they dropped it down to 2 children, and then 1 child, and then even married people were being taken, and that's where I got in. I got married, moved out of the house, and I faced the draft as being a draftee from Chicago. I signed up for OCS because of that. I didn't want to be a draftee from Chicago because they were all going for 4 months at Fort Polk and then on to Vietnam.
Just so that you know, we do have quite a few people on Zoom tonight. So those strange voices that you are hearing in the background, I could cover the screen with people, but I just kind of keep them at the very bottom there. So
Where are you?
yes, the place is haunted. But no, those are our friends on Zoom, and we allow them at the end to unmute themselves. We ask them during the lecture to stay muted, but then after the end of the lecture, we allow them to talk,
Okay,
just
well,
like they're in the room with us.
that is a relief. Disembodied voice. What are the
Well,
questions?
I avoided the draft by volunteering for it in picking
Uh-huh,
when I wanted to go in.
sure.
So that way I could go in. I still was only for 2 years, but I could pick the date
Could
that I
you,
wanted to go
could you
in.
pick your specialty?
No, I had to take the test.
Yeah. Okay,
We have
Yeah.
another one back
question
here.
back here.
And thank you all for using the mic. It makes those distant voices in the background be able to hear us better.
You know, you showed that graph of the escalation
Yeah.
as far as the numbers. Where do you think the motivation or the decision came to actually do all that increased, you know?
The Pentagon and Westmoreland, of course, have reams upon reams and files upon files of invasion stuff and war fighting. I am sure that during the course of 1955 or at least 1964 on, they had studies which outlined what they needed to do to win. And they were playing off a playlist. It's kind of like in a football game, they say that the coach scripts the first 15 plays. I think that's what they were doing here too. And as the war went on, they continued to script what they wanted to try to do next and the numbers they'd need. The Pentagon always has plans and people that are occupied full-time, generating what they need to do in order to reach their objective.
What do you think the effect of the end of the Vietnam conflict or war had on Gerald Ford's presidency? I mean, he entered into the presidency as the only unelected president in our history. But his presidency was really overshadowed by the removing of our troops from
Yeah.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
And do you feel that his presidency, we won't say his election things because that's a lot of political discussion, but his presidency in the Vietnam War?
I think it led to his not getting elected in his own right in 1976. He was looking at a nation that was hurting badly. They were ripped. They had taken very clear sides, and he wanted to try to solve that and heal it. And he himself said that he pardoned Nixon in order to promote the healing. A lot of people didn't like that. And that's what I've most often heard as the reason he did not get elected in his own right in 1975 or 1976, because the votes he lost from pardoning Richard Nixon. You're smiling. That's the right answer, isn't it? You knew that answer.
Do we have any other questions this evening? Well, I'd like to thank Ron for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. It is so amazing here put in different perspectives.
Thank you.
Next week, we have the final lecture in our series, and that will be Fred Johnson will be talking about the ultimate outcomes and how it's affected future conflicts going forward, and the politics of the United States going forward from this, and the influence it's had not only on the military, but on everything in our country. We look forward to having you here. For any of you that have friends that are not able to watch this live with us or to be here with us, please watch for it. It'll be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days after we do all the sound stuff and things like that. And so it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. And again, please remember that we'll be starting our spring lecture series on the third Monday in February in 2022. It seems so far away, but it's not that far away. And so, thank you all for coming tonight. We're excited that you are here, and we look forward to seeing you again.